Why was the public menorah lightings one of the Rebbe's campaigns? Forgive me for being indirect. The Baal Shem Tov taught, and this is brought, of course, in many Sifrei Musar as well, that the greatest way of serving God is when you serve God Almighty in a way which is inconsistent with your personality and your nature. If a person's nature is, for example, to be exact and they're able to be generous and kind, something which is very challenging is very effective in terms of your own spiritual growth and in terms of what you accomplish in the world. The Baal Shem Tov used to say that the sign that something is yours to do is that it's the most difficult for you. The reason I bring this up is because in general, Chabad Chassidus and the Chabad Rebbes, Chabad Rabbeim, were into pnimius, which means they were into doing things that were genuine and consistent on the inside and on the outside. In other words, showiness was antithetical to their very character and nature, and certainly to their philosophy. Of all the Chabad Rebbes, our Rebbe in particular described himself as an introvert. He's a book person, he's an intellectual, and everything to him is integrity, inner integrity. But he was a Rebbe. And like every Rebbe, he adapted to the needs of his generation. And any person who knew the Rebbe would have described him as a person who was full of joy and extroversion. The Rebbe himself said that these characteristics were created, not born. They were not natural to him to be so available to others, to be so on the outside, so in the public eye, and so joyous. His personality is quite different. And one of the things that the Rebbe adapted as a leader, as a Rebbe, which is fundamentally against his personality and nature, but he sort of figured this out almost as soon as it came to America, was the idea of public display. The Rebbe understood that the character of Americans is that everything has to be seen on the outside. The word the Rebbe would probably use would be a parade, a demonstration, a celebration. From the very beginning, almost as soon as the Rebbe got to this country, he started to make the Lag BaOmer outings, the parades. Way before he was Rebbe, as early as 1941 or 42, children got together, held placards, and marched. This is not something which is in concert with the deep Chabad tradition, but it's in concert with doing what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, where it needs to be done, how it needs to be done. In other words, it's the ultimate expression of Avodas Hashem, that since we live in a society where marching in the street and showing that you're proud and not embarrassed and ashamed is considered very important, and the character of the civilization, of the society, is such that they gravitate to this. If this is what America is, this is what the Rebbe is going to be. And the Rebbe put incredible stock in the parade. And the Chanukah Menorah is in the same vein. The concept of a public Chanukah Menorah, I think, I'm not certain, but I think it was the brainchild of one of the Shluchim that the Rebbe quickly adopted. And when it became controversial, after a few cities made menorahs, eventually they ran into the ADL and to the people who are concerned with separation of religion and state. The Rebbe decided from the very beginning that this was a campaign worth fighting over, because he knew instinctively the power of these public displays, and perhaps he already had seen the successes. There's the letter from the Rebbe which he wrote to the executive director of the Reform movement, whose name I don't remember, in which the Rebbe writes to him, "Had you made the suggestion to me 2 or 3 years ago, I would have considered it. But today the issue has resolved itself. Reform Judaism believes that Jews should not be showy, they should not be demonstrative, they shouldn't be in the street as Jews, because they feel that Jews acting distinctively is a source of anti-Semitism." The Rebbe could not disagree with them more. The Rebbe believes that for Jews to be less hated, it is critical that they demonstrate, that they show off in the street. And this idea of demonstrating in the street is very strongly represented by the whole theme of the Chanukah Menorah. over the years, the success of the idea of the Hanukkah Menorah has borne itself out. In other words, in general, Lubavitch does things which seem limited. Right? Some people feel you want to bring a person closer to Yiddishkeit, you bring him into a yeshiva, you bring him into your home, you teach him Torah. And Lubavitch is into individual mitzvahs, individual acts of Torah mitzvahs. The public Hanukkah Menorah can be argued is not even a mitzvah. It's just people participating and feeling Jewish. Both of these things are very, very important to the Rebbe, because the Rebbe believes very strongly about the principle of mitzvah gereres mitzvah, that being involved in Jewish causes and identifying as a Jew and being proud to be Jewish leads to all kinds of performance of mitzvahs. But just this alone, the Jews should be aware that they're Jewish and not ashamed of it and proud of it, is incredibly important and very, very useful for many things that ultimately come down to Torah mitzvahs, such as intermarriage. And for this reason, the Rebbe very strongly supported their campaigns. There's a little film in 1990 or 91 where the Rebbe describes the public lighting of the Menorah in the Red Square in Moscow. And he says thousands of people came, and after the Menorah was lit and the ceremony was held, the Rebbe made with his hand, the people danced around the Menorah. And you saw the pride that the Rebbe had, because the Rebbe very strongly appreciated the value that this has on the Jewish people who were doing that dancing and the Jewish people who were watching them do that dancing, in terms of Jewish identity, which ultimately brings to Jewish practice. I want to finish this video by making a very interesting observation. In the last few years, there are some Reform temples that have adopted the custom of making a public Hanukkah Menorah lighting. And I want to observe that if you understand the roots of the Reform, that a very strong part of their philosophy is the idea that Jews should hide their identity. And how the Reform movement is watching the success that Chabad is having with the public menorah lightings, and they're imitating it. So if the Reform are acknowledging that the best thing for Jewish people is to be proud in public about the Jewishness, why can't that be taken to every aspect of Yiddishkeit? That a Jew doesn't have to hide and doesn't have to attempt to assimilate and to look as much as possible like his Gentile neighbor, but just as he can be proud of lighting a menorah, he can be proud of wearing a yarmulke and tzitzis and all the other things that separate the Jewish people religiously from their neighbors.